Hello and welcome to this first video about Axway Managed File Transfer. This video is going to be focused on the SecureTransport demo environment. I'm going to provide a little bit of an overview of our typical deployment architecture and a run through of the key components of our SecureTransport admin UI. So this diagram represents a fairly typical deployment architecture for SecureTransport. What you will have is a public facing subnet where you deploy edge servers. Our edge servers act as a forward and reverse proxy for file transfers. In the backend or private subnet, you'll have your backend or core SecureTransport servers. These are the servers where day to day you perform all the admin, all the file transfer setup, all the user authentication happens on these servers. Some of the supporting infrastructure you need is a shared file system for the SecureTransport server, and for an enterprise deployment, a shared database. For our SaaS deployment, we look after all the infrastructure, including the file system and database on your behalf. So the demo environment that I've deployed consists of a single SecureTransport server. There's no edge in this environment. The difference here is SecureTransport can send files directly to any endpoint and the services are exposed from anywhere. So this is effectively a standalone SecureTransport server. I'll try and highlight when I go through the demos and setups of where things will differ if you do have an edge deployed, but for day-to-day setup and getting your hands dirty with the product, a SecureTransport server is more than enough for that. So the admin interface for SecureTransport in the demo environment is available at this URL here. Just one thing to note, just make sure you have the port 444 on the end. If you don't, you're going to hit the client interface, which you won't be able to log on to with admin credentials. Okay, so hitting the right interface, should be able to authenticate with username and password that we've provided here. And the first thing you're going to see when you're successfully authenticated is the operations page. So this is a list of our server interfaces here that we've got available for upload and download. So as a client, I could come along and connect to these interfaces and upload, download files. This will look the same on the edge. We can mix and match, so we could have certain services that are available on the edge server for our external clients and maybe not have them enabled on the backend SecureTransport server. So other items of note in this operations menu is your three sets of logs here. So file tracking, server log and audit log. These are going to be pretty empty and boring right now, but as we start moving some files around, I'll show you the corresponding log entries that we have available. Server configuration, this is where all of our server config parameters are defined. So you shouldn't need to really change anything in here. So moving on to the setup tab here. Noteworthy items in here is the certificates tab here. So firstly, when you set the environment up, you're going to create a internal certificate authority. On our SaaS platform, this will be done for you. You could opt to import your own certificate authority, which will make SecureTransport a subordinate CA within your own existing PKI infrastructure if you need to. Otherwise, probably the more common approach is we have our own self-signed CA here. From there, this local certificate store allows you to create certificates or import. So in the case of this admin D certificate here, this has been imported as a PFX/P12 certificate. This is a Let's Encrypt certificate tied to this admin interface plus the SecureTransport client. There's a couple of other certificates here that I'm using. So SSHD I'm using for my SSH interface. MDN is a certificate used to digitally resign all of the file transfer receipts as they're processed. Rep Encrypt is a certificate that I'm going to use for repository encryption, so this is storage at rest as files are transferred. Okay, so moving through the interfaces, authentication. I've got LDAP enabled. I'll come back and do another session on how LDAP and our authorization and authentication works, but it's there, it's enabled. We have got options for doing different authentication mechanisms for both end users and our administrators. These are handled completely separately. That's why the logins for the admin interface doesn't work with clients, and you can't log on to a client interface with admin accounts, etc. So we support a SAML based single sign-on for both. And we also have options to deploy plugins to extend the authentication options if we need to. Let's have a look at the accounts menu. So the accounts menu is where all of our file transfer user accounts are stored and created. I'm going to do quite a bit on the file transfer flow setup, which is going to involve setting up user accounts. So I won't go too much into user accounts here. I will introduce quickly the business units. So there's a single business unit set up in this environment called demo. Business units allow us to set some mandatory parameters for any user accounts that are created within this business unit, and it also allows us to group users and administrators under the same kind of management umbrella. On top of business units, I've got the ability to define custom admin roles. So the admin roles allow you to select which menu items your users or your administrators have access to, and this allows you to do delegated administration. So you might want to create like a first line support help desk role that you give them access to the logs, maybe the ability to reset passwords only. The account that I'm logged in with currently, the demo admin account, has access to a BU admin account, and this essentially gives them access to every menu item but only the demo business unit. So moving on to the access menu. So access, this is all geared up for end users and how we can group our end users and how we can restrict and provide access to what they do. So the user classes is how we group our users in SecureTransport. This is demo users here as an example of how I'm doing authentication with LDAP, and I'll come back to that one. You can create a series of classes. The idea is when a user logs on, they're placed into a user class, and then based on that user class you can define what they can and can't do. So this is done through the various restrictions and access rights that you define here. Now I'll do a separate video on authentication and authorization just to show you what's available. Additionally, we've got login restrictions here, which enables us to create a policy. The login restrictions are handled a bit differently. They're handled when the user first connects, so we can perform restrictions based on the number of sessions and things like that. We can define quite complex rules of what the user is allowed to do, so we can enable access from specific addresses. We've got a few examples of how we can create expressions here. So if we have the this top one, for example, we can restrict based on a username, we can restrict concurrent sessions, we can restrict based on source IP address, that kind of stuff. That's probably all I needed to show the access menu. Check out the authorization authentication video. This will go in a little bit more depth on what we've got available here. Let's move on to the applications menu. So applications, I'm going to do a series of videos on how we can move files around, so doing server initiated file transfers, and this will be where a lot of these applications will start to make sense. I'll just highlight now the other application types which aren't specifically used for file transfer, and these are kind of your maintenance applications. So file maintenance, we've got the ability to go and delete files off the server after a period of time. We've got jobs to go and delete old accounts that are no longer in use if we want to configure that. We've also got the typical jobs that are configured to go and keep our database at a nice manageable size, and these will delete the log entries after a period of time. So the route tab here, this is used for creating packages that we can then assign to our users, and we can do various transformation and routing steps as we process files. The other item you probably want to check out on this interface is the menu items down here on the top right. So you can link to our documentation. So this is offline and online documentation links. You may want to check out the API documentation. This will give you a link to the Swagger spec for the admin API, and you can play around with pulling information and trying to create stuff through the API. I'll provide some quick starts with some API samples, which should help get you started there. The client web theme editor, this will give you a view of what you can change with the client web interface. So you can brand this, you can put your own color schemes and logos in there and such if you need to. We also have a guide through the documentation portal which explains how to do this. Okay, so that concludes what I wanted to show for this interface. If you've got any questions, please reach out. And yeah, if you want to check out the other videos, they should go into a bit more depth on a lot of these items. Thank you.